I'm Richard Hara, your host of Social Impact Live, a weekly conversation with members of the Columbia School of Social Work community. I'm pleased to welcome to the program today 3 guests, Ashley Choi, Alison Chou, and Regina Honorat. All 3 are advanced year students in our master's program and recipients of the Council of Social Work Education Minority Fellows Program Fellowships. So Regina, Allison, and Ashley, welcome to Social Impact Live.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Now, as being minority fellows for the CSWE, you're part of a program that, as I see here, is aiming to reduce health disparities and improve behavioral health care outcomes for racially and ethnically diverse populations by increasing the number of culturally competent master's level behavioral health professionals available to serve racial and ethnic minority populations. So you're at this pivotal point in your training, right, where you're taking a path specifically and supported on this path to really sort of raise the presence of clinicians of color serving the BIPOC communities. So it's an opportunity today for us to hear about your experiences, what got you to this point, and also especially where you see yourself going professionally in this regard. So thanks again for joining us today here on Social Impact Live. Well, before I start, I always have to remember that we do save the last 10 minutes for Q&A, but if people have questions, to please write them into the chat, and hopefully we have an opportunity to address them here with the panel earlier rather than later in the program. So I always want to make that reminder for our audience. So we usually start the program with just a little bit of self-introductions about how you came to the Columbia School of Social Work. What was it that attracted you not only to our program, but social work in general? So is it okay? Can I start with you, Ashley? A little bit of the background that brought you here?
Yeah, for sure. Hi, my name is Ashley Choi. 안녕하세요. 제 이름은 최예림입니다. I was born and raised in Korea and grew up in Texas, and I'm currently finishing my last year of studies at the Columbia School of Social Work and a psychotherapist in training at the Cole Initiative for Psychotherapy in New York City, providing individual sessions for queer and trans young adults of color who are navigating intergenerational trauma, institutional violence, and ambiguous loss. And what brought me to social work is precisely the cause that Master's Fellow program is trying to eliminate and mitigate, is the lack of infrastructure for healing for monolingual, non-English speaking communities of color who are working class. And for queer and trans communities of color, race matters, yes. And I think also class has robbed poor and working class communities from healing and accessing services that they need to survive. So I think that is precisely the reason that I think I was chosen for this program to work alongside fellows like Allison and Regina and to grow more as a social worker. So nice to meet you all and looking forward to talking more together.
Okay, wonderful. And we can see why you were chosen for this fellowship program very obviously. So thank you so much, Ashley. We'll move to you, Allison. A little bit of maybe your story that you could share.
Sure, yeah. Hey, so I'm Allison. Nice to meet you all. And my decision to come to Columbia was actually a decision to return to social work. And the reason I say that is that about 10 years ago, in the beginning of my career, I kind of dipped my feet into social work. I was working at a nonprofit in New York City, really in the deep end of trauma work. And so while that was a life-changing and really formative experience. And I learned so much about what it means to work with survivors of trauma, and just gained a lot of tools that I now kind of keep in my toolkit, right? I inevitably got kind of burnt out, right? I experienced a lot of vicarious trauma. It's not really a surprise to anyone in our field, because I think we all recognize that we're uniquely susceptible to that. And so in retrospect, I feel really grateful for that experience, because it informed a lot of what it means to be sustainable in the social work field for me. But at the moment, I just did a total pivot. I took like a hard right turn. I moved to Spain, and I was like, I'll just be a Spanish teacher forever. And I went for my master's in Spanish linguistics, and I thought that that's what I would do. But that was also around the time that Trump was rising in power and became president here. And so even from abroad, I was just increasingly disturbed, right? Like, as we all were, watching him basically legitimize racism, xenophobia, hatred, right? And just these attacks, these really nasty attacks on our most vulnerable communities. And so I think it was with very deliberate two eyes open that I decided I didn't want to keep being a spectator. I wanted to return to the States, return here, get my master's in social work, and just get involved. So that's what brings me here today. I like to say that it took me a while to get here, but I'm very glad I'm here now.
And very glad to have you here now, Allison. So thank you. Wonderful. Regina?
Yes, thank you for having me. And like Alice and Ash, I was really interested in helping vulnerable populations, but more specifically, I was working at a maximum security facility for about 2 years, and I recognized that there's so much that needs to be done. There's so much that I can do to help the residents in that particular facility, and I recognized that I didn't have the skill set that I need. So that's what got me into social work, and I recognized how my knowledge and I guess my clients' knowledge about themselves, their situation, can really impact how they see themselves and recover. So that's how I got into social work. And my ultimate goal is to work with creating more programs to help empower them, to help promote them, and especially working with different systems that that can be barriers to them. So my ultimate goal is to work with the systems as well as our clients, to empower them to make the decisions that they need for recovery or their treatment, or to be the strongest version of themselves.
Okay, well, thank you. And you've brought in sort of different levels, I think, of the work, which of course is part of a more generalist kind of social work model, right? And I'm just curious. So you came here with a certain amount of lack of a better term, life experience, right? All of you, and with a definite purpose. And before talking about the my Minority Fellows program, I'm just curious. You're about to graduate from the School of Social Work, right? I assume that. Just want to make sure, but. Yeah. So, but getting ready to take that step forward into your professional futures. The training that you've got, the experiences that you've had through CSSW in the field, working with people and communities and so on. I mean, has it resonated with the goals that you came here with? Ashley, you're nodding your head, so I'll let you maybe sort of give us an example of how that's worked out for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I am also, in addition to being a fellow, I'm a coordinator for the Professional Development and Self-Awareness Program. And in the program, we help facilitate and create orientation materials for incoming students on what it means to be an anti-colonial and anti-racist social worker. And I think that has been incredibly helpful to create that space alongside my fellow students and colleagues to really learn how we can apply that to what we do in our field. And for example, right now I am a psychotherapist, and all of my clients are 90% of my clients are predominantly communities of color who are queer and trans. And I would not have been able to, I think, practice anti-oppressive social work practice if I hadn't learned alongside those who, always practice and embody that in their own lives. And so I think that shows up in working with people who come from different cultural and political values and norms, and informing my practice with it has been, I think, the epitome of applying anti-oppressive work in my social work.
Okay. Yeah, wonderful, Ashley. Allison, Regina, I mean, your experiences working with BIPOC communities or people, and how that's fit with your education and training, for example?
Sure, yeah. Going actually more back to your original question, I like how Ash used the phrase kind of informing my practice, because I feel that when I came to Columbia, I had nebulous ideas about, and there was a fire, right? But it didn't have a form or a structure. And being given the tools, like the readings and the discussions and the vocabulary, and being able to practice my fluency discussing these topics has really essentially given me a voice that I it was all kind of in the first steps of formation, but hadn't really been able to kind of come together. So I really think that my education and my time here, including my work working with Latinx immigrants at my placement last year, and now providing psychotherapy this year at my placement, it's all kind of come together in a perfect storm. And I say a storm because I plan to hit the ground running when I graduate, and disrupt where I can. I'm coming in with a fire and anger, and I'm not. And I think that's kind of what we're about as well as a social work field.
Yeah, and I'm curious, I'll stay with you, Allison, just for a little bit, how it comes together for you, because I'm always fascinated, how people pull together, all of the different parts of, being out in the field, the courses that they take, who they are, as a person, and what they bring in terms of personal qualities and so on. And for me as well, I mean, it seems that there's always that moment, I guess, when things kind of click, right? And for you, it's through this anti-oppressive work, and connecting with BIPOC communities, right?
Yeah. I mean, just for instance, learning the term anti-oppressive practice, or liberation social work, or strengths-based perspective. These are things that I had in my head. I knew that I had those values, but I didn't even know there were concepts and academic concepps and literature around these. And so you read about it in class, you talk about it, and prop, especially, and my prop class was was terrific. And then then you apply them into field, right? So what does it look like to be anti-oppressive with your clients? And that includes having to keep your implicit biases in check, right? And do a lot of reflection and inner work about, what am I bringing to this space? Am I bringing too much of myself, too little of myself, right? Am I approaching the client with humility and curiosity? So it was kind of a 3-point, it had to be there within me, and then I had to learn about it to be able to really conceptualize, and then I had to be able to put it into practice. And yes, it's like a perfect trifecta. Yeah.
It all comes together. Regina, how about you? I mean, is there a particular takeaway for you from doing this work, either about the work or maybe even about yourself?
The main thing that I was able to recognize is how to collaborate with our clients and to minimize trauma. It was probably difficult for them to go to a provider to understand what's going on with them mentally to get treatment. So trying to minimize their trauma, minimize the distress that they have with everything that's going on in their life, and trying to promote the dignity, give them the autonomy that they have, then empower them to continue with their treatment. So here in Columbia, we are able to recognize how we impact our client and how we must focus on our client and give them the tools to cope, give them the tools that they need to continue. So that's one thing that I recognize that I was able to learn, and be able to be patient with our clients and collaborate to help them start the conversation about mental health, start the conversation about getting treatment or whatever things that they recognize that they're needing assistance with.
So obviously this is what we hope to bring to our practice, right? In terms of, a sort of theoretical model, right? Values, and also to a certain extent, practical skills, right? In our work. So what is it that is important or valuable about being a clinician of color, right? What is it that what's the added value for all of that, right? On top of everything that we've just described in terms of anti-oppressive social work practice and so on. And I know this might be a little bit more personal than we might be comfortable answering, but yeah, what is it that being a clinician of color, I mean, sort of brings and benefits communities, BIPOC communities that's so important to be supported by CSWE and a program like the Minorities Fellows Program. I mean, what is that added value in your mind? I'm just opening it up to anybody.
Yeah, I think we can talk about a lot of things here. I mean, this could be, right, a whole class. We can talk about the health disparities and we can talk about the treatment gap for BIPOC communities. But I guess I just want to start with the fact that it's very painful to live in America right now as a person of color. I mean, it's always been, and it's always been unsafe, but I think we're kind of experiencing a heightened awareness. And, I don't want to get into all the reasons why our representation matters in mental health, but I think one is that it really can't be underestimated how important the sense of safety and trust that can be built when you are working with someone you're working with a therapist who you can identify with, and even without even having to talk about it, you understand that there is some lived experience that you have in common. And that doesn't mean that we don't bring our humility as clinicians into it. Even if I worked with a client who looks just like me, I don't assume to know all about their experience, right? I let them tell me, but still it's I feel like at a time when in our country where we don't necessarily take safety we can't take our safety for granted, having safe spaces in therapy, I think, and in mental health services is really essential.
Yeah, sort of trying to establish that relationship, right, and restoring trust being one element of that. Ash, Regina, you have any thoughts about this?
For me, it's in my community resilience. So trying to understand how they define themselves, how they've experienced difficult situation in the past and overcome those challenging situations, and trying to help them recognize that they are resilient and can continue in whatever challenge that they're experiencing at the moment. We are in a very difficult time, like Allison has mentioned, but what do they have? What qualities that they have? What coping skills? Whatever it is that keeps them going, and recognizing how they can keep going and helping others and maintaining their social structure and building from that. So I feel like resilience is the main thing that I would like to bring, as well as I'm learning more about myself and with my community.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Ash?
Yeah, thank you, Regina and Allison, for sharing. I think the added value is simply that it's life-saving, right? And I think we're seeing that real time with current COVID-19 vaccine distributions. An organization that I'm volunteering for, the Committee Against Anti-Asian Violence, located in New York, organizes and works with tenants of New York public housing. And they are elderly, working class, disabled, monolingual, non-English speaking immigrants of color. And the organizers at CAV are helping them schedule their vaccine appointments because of two reasons, right? One, tenants don't speak English, or two, tenants don't have the electronic devices to sign up, or sometimes it's both. So I think that when we do social work, we bring and create spaces that just simply didn't exist before. And I think that's really precious and life-saving. And I think there are spaces that weren't there before I came into the field of social work. And meeting with communities who are actively creating these spaces to disrupt what wasn't meant for us, I think that is truly not an added value, but I think the point of social work.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, I stand corrected then. I will not use the term added value because that presupposes that, yeah, it wasn't there to begin with. And I think that, you know, what you're saying for me really just underscores that that these are principles of good practice, right? As opposed to something that needs to be sort of tacked on, right? As a kind of supplemental. I mean, this should be at the core of our practice. Before we stray too far from people's personal experiences, there is a question from our audience. Have any of the panelists had personal experience with not receiving culturally competent care? And you know, has that informed your practice, I wonder?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just tell a quick story, which was that when I first came to Columbia, so 2 years ago, I tried to see a therapist who was an older white woman in New York. And in our second session, she's, you know, because I'm a Spanish speaker, and that tends to be surprising to people because I'm Asian American. And she said something like, yeah, but that must be really like, you must get a lot of reactions about that because you don't look American. And then she goes like, and I was like, white American. And then I ghosted her. I'm not gonna lie, I just didn't come to the next session. I mean, I called her, but I should have given her that feedback. I didn't have the courage at that time to do that, or the energy, right? That there's so much emotional labor that falls on us as people of color, right? To have to explain to white people, and it just gets exhausting. But I knew that I couldn't work with someone who inherently was going to say something like that she didn't see me as an American. So that's just a brief example.
Yeah, absolutely. And it makes me think that, you know, part of the one danger that we face is that, you know, if we're only thinking in terms of clinicians of color working with BIPOC, right, then, you know, that kind of dialogue doesn't take place, right? And we end up with, you know, that much more, I guess, division, if you will, right, or separation, or so I do think that's something to be considered. There's another question here. I'm interested in learning what the panelists' thoughts are about where the boundary between beneficial and being taken advantage of when a client is educating their provider about being BIPOC in order to have their needs met. So I guess the question says that obviously there's a beneficial aspect to it, but also something about being taken advantage of. I mean, have you ever experienced that kind of dynamic with a BIPOC client who is trying to educate you about their culture and so on, and is somehow taking advantage of it? I mean, what are your thoughts about that?
In my perspective, I feel as if the microaggression can come up where it's just like you're saying, hey, yes, in my culture, my parents or my family don't typically engage in X, Y, and Z, and you're kind of being challenged. So you feel like you're empowered and you can talk about your family, but at the same time, you're being challenged and questioned, and insecurities and anxieties can come up when you're being questioned and trying to understand their perspective. So I've been in a similar situation as Allison, and I felt like I had to constantly stand up for myself every single session and explain my culture, explain my background. And pretty much it's like I start to question myself. Was this the proper way? My insecurities. And it's like I felt as if I was even more confused. So and then there's times where I feel like, are you being nosy? And does this question really benefit my treatment at this moment.
Okay.
So it's very difficult when
Maybe.
dealing with that.
Yeah, that boundary, right? Sort of presuming too much, right?
Yes.
Or upon the relationship. Based on a shared background. There's another
Yes.
question, and I'm sorry, it's already 12:26, and I'm only getting to the first question, so I should try to get them in. One question is, I wonder from your experiences, what do you think racial and cultural majorities are doing correctly to rectify the situation, and what is a priority for us that should be improved in the context of social workers and human service providers? So for people who, clinicians who aren't, of color, then what are they doing right? Okay, what's helpful?
I'll go with this question. And I think this is an answer that I think I was reflecting on when thinking about the Master's Fellow program training, is that it has been actually really material and generative. And that's been very refreshing to me, because a lot of programs and scholarships that are highlighting oppressed and racialized peoples can sometimes, by sometimes I mean oftentimes, and always be empty token gestures. Right. So I think this training has really taught me to center the lived experiences of our clients. And that is something that a lot of programs don't try to center. So they don't rectify that. Right. And they keep trying to bring symbolic, representational, Black, Indigenous, people of color in their program with no meaningful and material infrastructure to support them. So I think this program definitely is something that I didn't experience a lot before in the social work field or even nonprofit work. So, and I hope that a lot of other cultural majorities who try to work with oppressed and marginalized peoples, and I hope they can remind themselves that if they are bringing people of color into your program, can you support them financially, culturally, and politically? And I think that is something that a lot of majorities are not doing right now, for sure.
Mm-hmm. And sort of to piggyback on that, maybe that's kind of an answer to the question here, which is oh, how do we restore trust among different BIPOC groups? That this isn't performative, right? That if we're going to be developing these programs, they do have to be centered on those people's experiences, and rather than sort of trainings, right, and sort of delivered from up above, etc. Really to be, I love that term, generative, right, Ashley, and to allow a more collaborative kind of approach towards building communities of support. So thank you for all your comments. There's a question. Yeah, Allison. Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that question about how to restore trust among BIPOC groups. I think repair and reparations, these are words that need to become a part of our vocabulary, right? But the fact that in this country, there's not even recognition of the problem in a lot of spaces, like obviously alt-right conservative spaces, right, is really unacceptable. And it's an exhausting fight for us as BIPOC, whether we're clinicians or clients or, anyone, right? It's exhausting to even have to just justify that there is a problem and explain that to people who aren't willing to see it. But after that recognition, then we can talk about repair and reparations, I think.
Yeah, and just that moment there, sort of thinking about client clinician and that divide, right, and how we sort of separate and segregate, right, into different interests, is something that I also want to think about in terms of identity and working with BIPOC communities. But we're running out of time, and there's just one last question here that I want to get in. New York City resident I guess I'm a New York City resident. I'm criminal justice impacted, and upon my release, I've worked in the reentry field. I'm a potential student in the MSW program. I'm interested how trauma affects your practice in dealing with people of color who are also criminal justice impacted. What are your thoughts about that?
I feel like trauma impacts all of my clients, especially I work in a substance use disorder clinic, and a lot of people use substances to cope with their trauma and never really got to the root of it. So encouraging to get treatment, to dig deep, to see what happened and how they responded is very important to their road to recovery and with their mental health, if they have any other diagnosis as well. So how we deal with it is encouraged, because we're in a short-term facility. They might need more time than other patients to get the help that they need. So identify the trauma, continue to work with a therapist that can help them and bring healing in every single aspect of themselves, so they can grow and be strong and be able to impact other people who have been in a similar situation.
So trying to, as best you're able to adapt your work individually to the person's needs. And then I think, on a systemic basis, really advocating for that space within agency practice, right? In order to provide the maximal support for people who are affected by trauma in various settings and coping with various issues. So yeah, I'm sure that we could develop this topic much further, but I'm afraid we're out of time. So I'll take this opportunity now to thank our three guests today on Social Impact Live: Regina Honorat, Alison Chou, and Ashley Choi, for joining us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.
Oops, sorry. We'll have probably resources posted on our Facebook page connected with this particular program. Next week, we have Professor Jinyu Liu to talk about her COVID work with members of the New York City Chinese-speaking community. So looking forward to that. Thanks again to our guests this week. Everybody take care. See you all next time. Bye-bye now.